everybody. Welcome to the Fabled Upkeep. I'm your host, Freddie, joined by my co-host, Neal.
Hey, how are you?
And our co-host, Jared.
Hello, friends.
And today we're bringing y'all a wonderful deck, all thanks to Jared and his obsession with red. We're going to bring you guys Toralf, God of Fury. Now, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about Toralf, God of Fury, Jared?
Yeah, sure. So Toralf is one of the new commanders from Kaldheim. He is 2 and 2 red for a legendary creature god, a 5/4 with trample. And whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, Toralf deals damage equal to the excess to any target other than that permanent. And he has a backside, so also it's Toralf's Hammer. So that's 1 in a red for legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature has 1 in a red, tap, unattach it. It deals 3 damage to any target and then return Toralf's Hammer to its owner's hand. Also, the equipped creature gets +3/+, though, as long as it's legendary, and you can equip it for 1 in a red. This deck is not going to focus really so much on the Toralf's Hammer side. You know, it's a nice little bit of extra value if you need something that deals damage to a specific target and you have a creature and you're able to use it. But we're going to focus on Toralf mostly for this deck, and also his ability with the non-combat damage. We're going to be looking to deal a lot of excess non-combat damage to our opponents using cards like Blasphemous Act, and we're going to try and let our opponents load up the board, get Toralf online, and then just play these awesome damage-dealing red cards that are just going to hopefully deal a lot of damage to our opponents in one shot with them. So yeah, that was my original goal of this deck, is just to see how much damage I could stack up using Toralf and that ability that's stapled onto him.
And I might just add that when I did a little bit of playtesting on MTGO with this deck, you can definitely pull off 50+ damage on turn 3-4 with it. It's not, no, I'm sorry, more than that. It was 50+ per player, so it was 150 damage. I was able to finish the game off on turn 4 with it, with a Blasphemous Act, with enough creatures on board.
Yeah, that's a crazy amount of damage, and that actually excites me a lot. So I'm ready to start talking about some of the cards that I picked for my version of the deck. So I quickly mentioned Blasphemous Act. This is a pretty infamous board wiping commander. 8 in a red, it costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, but it deals 13 damage to each creature when you cast it. So a lot of the times in many games, this card costs 3 mana or less. I mean, a lot of the time I even see it being cast for 1. It's a very, very great board wipe, and it's even better with Toralf because you just start pinging people for tons and tons of damage, especially if they have like 4 or 5 creatures. You could potentially just kill them if you have Toralf and play Blasphemous Act. So your opponents, it might cause them not to play as many creatures as they would, which is also a good thing for this deck because, you can just wait even longer and just keep building up your resources and eventually, cast something potentially even better, multiple spells in a row. So either way it works out for us, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a couple other things that I want to talk about in terms of dealing a lot of damage massively. So we have these Blasphemous Acts of the world, right, where we're going to be casting them. Hopefully our opponents are playing a lot of creatures, and that way we're dealing damage. But, what if our opponents aren't exactly playing a lot of creatures? What exactly is a good game plan for that? And I thought of cards like Fiery Emancipation. So that's an enchantment, 3 and 3 red. If a source you control will deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player. So I say, okay, well, if my one opponent has a lot of creatures, my other opponent doesn't, Toralf can deal excess damage to any target. So I don't have to necessarily target the opponent whose creatures that are dying. So if I have cards like Fiery Emancipation, one opponent's board could just kill everybody else. So I wanted to make sure that, even if we only had one opponent that was playing a lot of creatures, we could use that opponent's creatures to, deal a lot of massive damage to our other opponents or their permanents if need be. So of course we got cards like Torbrand in there, so Torbrand, Thane of Redfell. And That's the Dwarf Noble from Throne of Eldraine, so that's going to deal an additional 2 damage for every source of damage that's being dealt. But also I thought of an interesting one for this deck was Chandra's Incinerator. So 5 in a red for a 6/6, it costs X less to cast, or X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. And it's a 6/6 of trample, and whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that opponent controls. So again, it, is a lot of excess, super type of damage that we're doing to our opponents. And something that would also fit in with this game plan is being able to protect Toralf, because otherwise, if he's on the board and we're casting a board wipe that's affecting everything, he's most likely going to die. So we want to include things like Magebane Armor. So that's an artifact equipment for 3. Equipped creature gets +2/+4 and loses flying, but we're kind of ignoring that. The effect that's most important is prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to equipped creature. So that's going to ensure that Toralf survives like these multiple board wipes that we're going to be casting, and so we could use his effect over and over again without having to recast him and paying, that commander tax.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Yeah, so that in a nutshell is pretty much the game, or the deck's main game plan, I would say.
I wanted to point out with what you were talking about for the main game plan. Also, for somebody who isn't playing creatures, there's other cards out there. I wanted to just touch base on for the main game plan on WinCon. I'll let Neal talk about one in particular that he added that is an absolute star in this deck.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you're probably referring to Varchild, Betrayer of Keldor. So that's 2 in a red, right? Human Knight, it was in one of the commander sets. And basically whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player creates that many 1/1 red survivor creature tokens. And what's really cool is that the survivor tokens that you give each of your opponents can't block, and they cannot attack you or a planeswalker you control. And then whenever Varchild actually leaves the battlefield, if she gets destroyed or exiled, you gain control of everything that you put out on the board as far as the survivors are concerned, right? So you put her out, she attacks, you start giving survivors to everybody on the board, and then if somebody's like, well, I don't like that Varchild, they try to remove her. Guess what? Once she leaves, you gain control of everything, gain control of all those survivors that you put out on that battlefield. So that one was really, really cool. I like that one. There's also an older card. It's a little bit more expensive that kind of does the same thing. It has like a cumulative upkeep. I didn't go that route. I just kind of kept it simple with this Varchild, Betrayer of Keldor. I thought she was really great. But to kind of piggyback off of what Jared was saying earlier, my version of the deck too, I kind of took that same, this deck is somewhat linear, right? So, if the goal of the deck is to try to really do as much excess damage as you can, right? So having cards like Torbrand, providing that little extra oomph, doing Fire Emancipation or Dictated the Twin Gods, things like that kind of help provide that strategy that we're trying to do, that excess damage, and one thing that I kind of went a little bit different, when you don't have a lot of creatures, right? You can play cards like we just talked about, like, the Varchild. But I kind of took it and said, well, you know what? I'm playing red. And another great thing that red does is, dragons, right? So my backup plan was to kind of play some fun dragons just in case if Toralf gets too expensive to play, or, you're just looking for some other big damaged creatures. Dragons are always a great thing to play in red. So I kind of went down that path too, just kind of as a backup plan to kind of, if something goes sideways, we have something else that we can kind of focus on. So that was kind of my deal. But yeah, it was an interesting deck to build for sure, because I'm not a huge mono red player. But this thing, like Freddie was alluding to, this thing is extremely powerful. And I think people don't realize it when you put it out on the field. Oh, it's just a 5/4. That's no big deal. Toralf's not going to do anything. But the minute you play one Blasphemous Act or any of these other, deal 4 damage to each creature, I mean, that it adds up, because you'd be surprised at how many cards people will play at the beginning of the game, or how many creatures. They're usually 1/1s, 1/2s. They're very insignificant, right? You're not going to see those big creatures until later in the game. So you can do a lot of damage really early with Toralf. So, yeah, it was really interesting.
So why don't we go ahead and move into some red card draw? Something that red I feel kind of lacks somewhat, but we have to have some card draw in a deck to keep us going, keep us fueled, and get
I
us to
think
the end.
I think this deck really needed even more, and I think you felt that same way too, Freddie.
Yeah, I felt like there was oftentimes I was lacking cards needed to finish the game out, but I went the route of putting in some wheels into the deck. Obviously, Wheel of Fortune would be the MVP, but Wheel of Fortune also costs an arm and a leg right now. I think we're up at what, $700? Is that right, Jared? Right around there?
Probably cost you 2 legs, not just one.
I don't know about 700, but I definitely know that one Wheel of Fortune is more than the cost of my entire version of this deck. So
There you go. We'll just leave it at that.
It is not worth it to go out of your way to purchase it for this deck. I mean, of course, if you have the resources to do so, I mean,
Or
by all
if you happen
means,
to have
feel
one.
free.
To
yes,
be honest,
of course. I'm not.
I always feel like wheels are dangerous, right? I have one. I have the Reforge the Soul in mind, but that one always kind of I kind of go to that last now because I just always feel bad about giving other opponents more cards in their hand that actually could take us away from what we're trying to do. So that it's always dangerous to do that in my opinion.
It's always situational too, depending on what resources everybody else have. But if I have no cards in hand or one card and that's what I have, you know what? Them 7 cards I'm going to receive afterwards are going to be a huge payoff that I'm going to need to continue and to bring the game to a close.
Yeah, so that's actually an interesting question, Freddie, for you. So you said earlier that when you were lacking card draw with this deck, so were you actually holding cards in your hand, but you still wanted more on top of those, or were you down to like actually 1 or 2 cards and you just couldn't get more than that? So what was the situation
I
exactly?
was down to 1 or 2 cards or no cards in hand.
Well, there you go. Wheel of Fortune is exactly what you want in that kind of situation then. I mean, right?
Exactly.
Even if your opponents are also getting gas, you're getting the most gas.
The one that I really wanted to talk about was Winds of Change. It's 1 red, and it says all players shuffle their hand into their libraries and then draw that same number of cards they originally held. Now, yes, this could be problematic if we are in a situation where we only have one card. But if we end up wheeling into this and a bunch of other jank that we don't need, or we have cards that, I don't know, we have a handful of lands and or ramp that we don't need at the current moment, but we're trying to close the game out. This is a great way to try and find what we need. For 1 red, I think it was a nice include for the deck. Then Wheel of Misfortune, the new one, that everybody, I don't know, there's been mixed feelings about Wheels of Misfortune.
Yeah, I haven't heard too many great things about it, to be honest. I heard it's kind of underwhelming.
I'm a bit torn on it.
That one you have to be careful. I mean, especially since you're playing red, right? You're naturally.
I've been hosed by this card. I'm gonna be honest right away. I have been hosed by it, and
I'm not a fan of it at all.
Needed the wheel, and somebody took more damage, but it's still card draw in red. That's the way I look at it. I'm trying to find ways to refill my hand as much as possible. You also have Wheel of Fate, but then that's a suspend. Wheel of Fortune on a suspend for 3 or 4 turns.
Yeah, not the biggest fan of Wheel of Fate either. Like, having to wait 4 turns is pretty backbreaking.
Exactly. So really, the wheel package is kind of dwindling down here and not really going to be working very well unless you have the money for a Wheel of Fortune. And you can go for it. Reforge the Soul is cool too. I like that one for the miracle cost. But
you also have Chandra Flamecaller, right? I mean, that's another wheel effect that's not that expensive.
That's
Magus of the Wheel, that one's not too bad. If you can get it to go off.
That's the key on that one. That's the one I don't like because it's sitting on the board unless you have a haste enabler to do it immediately. It's pretty big feel bad if it just dies. Somebody else doesn't want to wheel.
That's a good point.
But Those are definitely
I
options.
find people tend to let it live though, just because they know it's going to draw them cards. So like if you play at an opportune time, where it's politically advantageous for you to do so, Magus of the Wheel
Oh,
it
yes.
tends to live. It tends to live more than the other Maguses, I would say.
That's true. That's true. That's definitely an option, and it's definitely very affordable, to say the least. But why don't we get into a little bit more of the other package in our draw category? So things like faithless looting and the ladder. So, Jared, if you want to talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, so I have a few looting effects in my version of the deck. So we got Faithless Looting. So that's red to draw 2, then discard 2 with flashbacks. That's pretty solid. You get to do it twice for 4 mana. Not too bad. I play Exile draw as well. So things like Commune with Lava. So you can pay X and 2 red, instant exile the top X cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You can play those cards. So, if you're looking to spend all your extra additional mana that you're, Commune with Lava is a good way to use it, because you can wait. You can wait, and then at the end of your opponent's turn, you can then play them during your turn, because it says until the end of your next turn. So you don't have to worry about it being until the end of that particular turn. So that's kind of cool. A funny card that I have is Humble Defector, 1 in a red. So you draw 2 cards, but target opponent gains control of it. But that won't really matter, especially if we're wiping the board constantly. So we could just tap it to draw 2 cards and then wipe the board. So, it's 2 mana to draw 2, so that's pretty cool. I really like Burgi, God of Storytelling, especially with the Harmful Horn of Bounty. So you can discard a card to exile the top 2 cards of your library, and you could play the cards this turn. So I think that's a pretty nice one.
Now you're
Jessica,
talking. That's music to my ears, man. I love it.
yeah,
And
Jessica's,
the horn side.
yeah, Burgi as a creature is okay in this deck. It's not really what we're looking to do with it though. You can generate some mana off of it, and it's a body if you need it. But I'm playing it in this deck for the horn, just because,
All for the horn, baby.
yeah, exactly. I've got Jessica's Will in my deck, so I like that one a lot. So you can get the red for each card target opponent's hand, and also exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you can play them this turn. So if you have Toralf, you get both effects, which is pretty awesome. I really like Valakut Exploration. Even though we're not a landfall deck, you can, every time you play a land, you exile the top card of your library. You can play it for as long as it remains exiled. But then at your end step, if there are any cards exiled with it, they go to the graveyard, and it deals that much damage to each opponent. So it's mostly going to be used for card draw, but it could be used for those last little points of damage if it ever comes up. And we're hurting for card draw so much in looting that I'm actually playing Duretti Scrap Savant in my deck, just for the +2 to discard up to 2 cards and draw that many. So, even though we're not an artifact-based deck, I like Duretti as kind of a loot machine. Because you can keep doing it over and over again, which is kind of cool. And it's good because we're actually playing a lot of board wipes, so Duretti has a higher chance of surviving a couple of rounds of the table in at least my version of the deck, because I'm playing, many more board wipes than I would normally play in a deck, just because they synergize so well with Toralf. I've also got Outpost Siege in, so we're going to basically be picking cons for that. We're not really a creature-based deck, so the dragon side is not that useful to us. But, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you can play that card. So again, it's one of those exile draws. I have Court of Ire in my build, just to, introduce the Monarch. It's a solid form of end of turn card advantage. With board wipes, it's pretty good, because people really aren't going to be getting it back to their side that much. And then also, it deals a lot of damage, and since we have damage doublers and even triplers in our deck,
If I'm not mistaken, that is 7 damage, correct? So if we have the
yeah,
Monarch?
if you're the Monarch, it's 7 damage, so that's a lot.
To whatever target we want as well. It's not a loss of life to a player.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay. I didn't remember the card off the top of my head. I just wanted to hear it. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, and then I have Reforge the Soul and Chandra Flamecaller, and we kind of already talked about those. So that's pretty much all I thought of. And then of course the modal double face of land, Valakut Awakening, Valakut Stoneforge. that's kind of an auto include in this deck too.
Yep, I kind of borrowed from my Belborca deck, right? My Boros deck. So red's really good, especially as of late. The exile, right? You get to mess with your exile zone and cast cards for either that particular turn or maybe until your next turn. So I kind of leaned into some of that with red. So I used like Ignite the Future, which is 3 in a red, basically exile top 3 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. So it gives you a little bit of time to play 3 additional cards. Maybe you need to do it, maybe it's towards the end of the game and you have a lot of mana. This card can kind of help you dive 3 cards deeper. I also, because you're playing a monocolored deck, usually, especially as you get towards the end of the game, having extra lands it's okay. I leaned into Tectonic Reformation. I thought that was a really cheap enchantment that we can use to basically gives each land in your hand cycling for 1 red mana. So, and then it also has cycling. So if you're just in a position where you can't do any of that, cycle away and draw another card. And then one that I really like that I borrow from my mono white decks is Girpa Ori. Especially because red has a tendency you can easily go through your hand in 1 turn really quickly. And basically at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if you have no cards, you get to draw 3 cards. So you'd be drawing 4 with the original draw that you have at the beginning of that turn. So I really like Girpa Ori, and especially if you have if you're drawing numerous lands, you can also, Girpa Ori also allows you to put an additional land onto the battlefield as well. And then I played Atali. Atali is another one of those great creatures that, provide that exile draw advantage. And you basically get to cast everybody else's stuff, right? 4 and 2 red. He comes in. Whenever he attacks, you exile the top card of each player's library, and you may cast any number of those spells from those cards without paying their mana cost. So it's kind of a pseudo draw as well for red. And then another great one was Furious Rise, which is an enchantment. And this one really kind of depends on your build. My build does play a lot more on the creature side, just in case Toralf doesn't stay on the field, I do have some pretty large dinosaurs and dragons that are definitely going to provide that extra damage. And basically, Furious Rise gives you the beginning of your end step if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Basically exile that card, and you may play it. You may play that card until you exile another card with Furious Rise. So it kind of gives you a little bit of time to, see if that card's something that you can play on your next turn. So it kind of, helps a little bit. It's doing what red is naturally. It seems like Wizard has kind of pushed red being able to really kind of utilize that exile zone for card drawing, which is kind of cool. And then obviously we had like War Room. And Endless Atlas is another great card that I use in my mono white decks that really provides some great card draw as well.
Yeah, I think the most interesting one there to me was Tectonic Reformation. I have a Gavi deck. I love Tectonic Reformation in that deck. I've never actually considered using it just like in a straight mono red deck though. So I would be, curious to see the success it would have with me if I was to include it in a mono red deck. So I'd be excited to try it out.
Yeah, it really depends on how many basics. I really tried to limit my non-basic lands in this version because, usually I'll lean a lot more into non-basics to kind of provide that extra, whether it's, like a Maze of Ith to protect us or, there's different little things that various non-basic lands can provide. So I really tried to keep that to a minimum. That way I had as much mountains as possible to kind of, if Tectonic Reformation does show up, it definitely, there was a point when I was testing the deck, I probably do 3-4 different cards off of it, because I kept drawing a mountain, or I'd get rid of that, so it was kind of nice, for sure.
Right on, okay. Well, why don't we move into a little bit of ramp too for the deck. I see everybody, all of us all like Mana Geyser, which is a stellar card for the deck. I didn't see anybody else play Seething Song though, which I was really surprised about. I really like Seething Song. Pay 3, get 5. Like a pretty good payoff. Obviously, again, this is if you're playing into the Expel strategy that you could go down with this deck. And one that I added for my deck, which I really liked, was Braid of Fire. Did any of you guys like Braid of Fire? Y'all's build? Are you running enough instant speed payoff?
I mean, yeah, so that one I thought about first because it is really good, right? And most people don't.
Can be.
Yeah, it can be. I tend to find that I never, because you can, because it's during the upkeep and you can really only do a limited amount, I didn't like it. But if you're running Leyline Tyrant, I think it becomes even more advantageous for this because then it doesn't go away and then you're able to kind of pass that along to your other parts of your phases. So I think if you marry those two cards together, it's an excellent addition to this deck for sure, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
The way I played this card, I tried this deck in a few different strategies. I went for more of the dragon theme, like Neal did. I tried to go for a very punchy build where I was just trying to burn everybody out with Blasphemous Act or things of that nature, board wipes. And then I just went for a straight up burn build with Expels. And if you're going to go the Expel route, Braid of Fire I think is a lot of fun. You could also cast things like Thrill of Possibility and or looting effects that are free essentially with Braid of Fire. It's a fun card all around for some ramp. Then Cage Sun. Cage Sun was a great one that I added to the deck. Being able to double your mana. Mana Flare was another one that I added to my deck. I'm going to go ahead. You already talked and touched base on Jessica's Will, but Jessica's Will is a ramp spell through and through. Being
sure is.
Add for each card in target opponent's hand. That's won me a couple games before. And cost reduction as opposed to ramp per se, but I guess we could kind of plump them into the same thing. We could go with the Ruby Medallion. Red spells cost 1 less to cast. And Fire Diamond, that's a nice little ramp spell to put into a mono red deck. But then Runaway Steamkin is also a good one that I really enjoy for some ramp. That's a 1 in a red that says whenever you cast a red spell, but if you have fewer than 3 1/1 counters on it, put a 1/1 counter on Runaway Steamkin, and then remove 3 1/1 counters and add 3 red mana. And this can reoccur. It doesn't just happen one time, which is great. And then Neheb the Eternal is, I think, one of my MVPs for creatures for ramp. With a flick 3 and at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, if you add red mana for each 1 life an opponent lost this turn.
Yeah, I like Neheb a lot.
Get out of control.
Yeah,
and
you can get a lot off that guy.
Neal, you and I had discussed this earlier too on the Braid of Fire again. What was the other card that you had mentioned that goes really well with it?
Leyline Tyrant, which is a dragon, which is cool. Basically 2 in a red, flying. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases in. So, this one, if you have it out, kind of like what Jared was alluding to, this pairs so well. It's almost like, I always love Crewfix God of Horizons, right? Crewfix this is kind of like that, where it provides that ability to kind of store that mana, essentially, right? And pairing that with Braid of Fire in Freddie's deck is, man, this is just a great combination to really store up a lot of mana. And I tell you what, if you save that mana and Leyline Tyrant, the rest of it says whenever it dies, you may pay any amount of red mana, and when you do, it deals that much damage to any target. So this, in turn, also can kind of help with our game plan as well. Because if you've stored, let's just say 5, 6, 7 red mana, this thing dies because people are going to probably be out to get it. Man, you can really do some. This can really set off Toralf right here with dealing, 5 to 7 damage right off the bat. So I like these two together. I think they're a really great combination.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. That's one that I've added to all my builds. I love Leyline Tyrant. It's a great card. You can just dump mana into it, just store your mana.
And I tell you,
later, Toralf's out. It does a lot of damage.
It's so cheap. I mean, 4 mana, this is such an aggressively costed card. I would have definitely thought this would have been, because if you take a look at over the years Magic and Dragons, something with as much as this card does, I would have definitely said, if somebody just told me, hey, we're printing this dragon, I would have said, oh, that's going to cost at least 6, not cost 4. That's pretty impressive. So it's a really good bang for your buck, for sure.
It's a push
with
card.
All that writing on
it. Yeah.
I think we could all agree on that one. Yeah. And then I really liked an add-on that you did, Jared, when it came to Recursion. Why don't we touch base on Recursion real fast for this deck, which I thought was really, really neat that you threw this in here, because usually you only see this in a combo deck with LED and this card and another dockside potentially. You see this a lot, but in this deck, I actually really appreciated.
You appreciated the power of Underworld Breach. Yeah,
yes,
I threw it in here just because it's it's 1 in a red enchantment. Each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. And at the beginning of your end step, sacrifice Underworld Breach. So I considered this card very similar to Yawgmoth's Will. It's not Yawgmoth's Will, but it kind of is in a way. Because with Yawgmoth's Will, with Underworld Breach, you could also do the combos as you were mentioning earlier, and the same with Yawgmoth's Will. But most of the time, especially in the kind of games that we're playing, in our pods, you may only cast 2 or 3 spells with a card like Yawgmoth's Will anyway, right? So Underworld Breach kind of fulfills that role too. In the later game, you're going to have a lot of cards in your graveyard, so it's okay, I play my Underworld Breach, I play the best 3 cards in my graveyard. Do I care if the rest of my graveyard's exiled? No. I don't really have a way of getting things back anyways. I'm not playing 10 of these kind of effects. So, and especially because we're playing, these looters and stuff like that, we are, it could be even quicker that we're filling up our graveyard to cast our Underworld Breach. I only have 1 of these kind of things in my deck, so it's definitely not something I'm going to be playing every day. But yeah, I threw it in there because I was yeah, I want to try it out and see how good it is.
I really enjoyed playing with it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I was able to pull some fun shenanigans with it, including, having a dockside in there with a Jessica's Will, and then having a ton of mana generated to essentially play. But I ended up not comboing off, but winning on that turn, just for the sheer amount of value that was coming out of the graveyard again, including a countered Blasphemous Act, which was what got me the win. Great times.
Yeah, awesome. Let's talk about the removal that this deck's going to play for a little bit. I kind of went in for artifact removal, so I'm playing cards like Buy Force and Vandal Blast.
Good old Vandal Blast.
Yeah, it's a great card. You can play it for 1 red, or you could just play it for 5 and wipe everybody's artifacts except for yours. So I think it's pretty great. Tybalt's Trickery, I did want to play that in this deck because it's a red counter spell. I mean, that seems pretty good. Red doesn't get too many of those. You could even play Pyroblast or Red Elemental Blast, if your group plays a lot of decks with blue commanders cards too. I got Chaos Warp in my build, and I thought Volcanic Offering was a really good card for this deck. So that's the offering where it's 4 in a red instant. You can destroy target non-basic land you don't control, and you let target opponent also destroy a non-basic land that you don't control of their choice. And you can do 7 damage to target creature you don't control, and then an opponent can also do 7 damage to target creature that you don't control. So, with Toralf, that's 7 damage. You could be doing a lot more damage to other things. So you can help split it up. So it's Volcanic Offering is already a solid card, and even with Toralf on the battlefield, it becomes that much better.
Yeah, I had a couple cool ones too. One that I really liked was Perforos Intervention, and you actually probably haven't seen very many people play this card. It's 1 and X. Basically, you can either A, create X1 red elemental creatures with trample and haste, basically sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, or Perforos Intervention deals twice X damage to target creature or planeswalker. So it kind of has a little bit of extra double damage on it, just depending upon how much mana you want to pay into it. It's kind of a cool single target, damage dealer. I also went with another weird one, Into the Maw of Hell, 4 and 2 red. Basically, you get to destroy target lands, so it kind of provides that land if there's a Guy's Cradle or something like that, because Freddie loves to play that card, you can destroy that, and then it also does 13 damage to target creature. So if there's a 1/1 out there, you're looking at 12 additional excess damage that Toralf can throw around. So it's, this is a really great card that I kind of liked. I also did stuff like Storm's Wrath, which deals 4 damage to each creature. It's 2 and 2 red, and Chain Reaction. That's a good one, basically dealing damage based on the total number of creatures on the battlefield. And, I ran a couple of the other ones that you talked about, Jared, and then I really leaned in, as I mentioned earlier, was like some of the dragons, like Ryuzi, the Fallen Star, basically 5 and a red, and whenever it dies, it deals 5 damage to each creature without flying. And then Drakuseth. Drakuseth is really strong, I think. A little expensive, but, 4 and 3 red, flying, whenever it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target, and then 3 damage to each up to 2 other targets. So kind of provides a little bit of that extra damage to throw around also. And then I'm surprised you didn't talk about it, but one I thought was one of your favorite cards, Jared, Inferno Titan.
Yeah, I didn't feel like it was strong enough for this deck. It's a strong card, but Toralf, his Mighty Hammer is stronger than Inferno Titan's chain whip thing that he's got there.
That's true. Well, I ran it in my version because I was thinking of you, and I thought Inferno Titan definitely deserves a home, for sure. And hey, you never know, that fire breathing ability, pay a red and it gets +1 until end of turn. Hey, that makes a difference sometimes.
Yeah, that was very nice of you. I'm glad you included my friend Inferno Titan there.
What about you,
Pairs
Freddie?
really well with Terror of the Peaks.
Yeah. That's a Freddie classic right here. Did you run
Terror of the Peaks? And I really wanted to run Terror of the Peaks in this deck. You just don't have enough creatures and enough payoff for it unless you really go with a creature heavy package, but then
That's okay. I ran it for you in my deck as well. So I got Inferno Titan for Jared and Terror of the Peaks for you, Freddie. So I took care of both of you guys.
The wonderful little combo. Sweet. Love it. Love it. I do love Drakuseth Maw of Flames in the deck, though. That's a nice one. That was a good ad, Neal.
Did you have any other, another kind of interesting one? So obviously the latest and coolest thing to do in Magic right now is to run snow permanents. So you can run Skred, which is only 1 red, and it's an instant. It deals damage to target creature equal to the number of snow permanents. That's actually extremely powerful. You could really blow somebody out of the game, depending upon how many lands you've played, or if you're playing other snow creatures, if that's the way you decide to take the deck or something like that. But I run 31 snow mountains in my version, so obviously you're not going to have 31 out, but maybe you will. But Skred can actually do some heavy damage, and it only costs 1, and it's an instant, so it's pretty interesting for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a good include. Yeah, if you're going the snowland route. Yeah, I really don't have much else to talk about with the deck. We kind of talked about the main game plan, some of the ramps, some of the card draw, and some of the removal. So I hope you all go out there and build yourselves a Toralf deck and try and deal as much damage as you can, and let us know how much damage you can do in one go with Toralf. I'd be curious to know.
I think
Let
the
the
high
world
score.
burn around you and smile away.
Yeah, I think the high score for Freddie was 150, so that's a tough one to beat.
Yeah, that's pretty
definitely
good.
does a lot of work. But on that note, guys, I hope everybody enjoyed. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful time. Please like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. We're the Fabled Upkeep. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.